Hello, my wonderful people from all over the world. I welcome you to my channel once again. I have been talking about Angry God in this my Angry God channel. Permit me to continue from where I stopped last time. I told us that what introduces God's anger is violation of his law. Not until God introduced law, there is nothing like that expression, God is angry. Meanwhile, if you look through the book of Genesis, you discover that there was no specific area where it was mentioned that God was angry. But we saw God dishing out judgment on those who violated his laws. For instance, in the Garden of Eden. Meanwhile, having this in mind, remember I told us that I will be presenting this series of teaching based on God's dealing with the nation of Israel as documented in that ancient book called the Scriptures. Having said this, I want to bring our mind to the book of Genesis. For instance, Genesis chapter number 18 and verse number 30, where Abram was begging God not to be angry so that he would make an inquiry from him. The word used in that particular portion of the Bible is the word kara. That is a Hebrew word, kara. Then, if you look at the book of Deuteronomy, chapter number 1 and verse number 37, where God was introduced as being angry with Moses, the word used there was anaf, which is the Hebrew word for it. We discover that in the whole book of Genesis, every expression of one being anger is not attributable to God. Instead, it was human being that was angry with one another or something like that. Having said this, I want to continue by telling us that in God's dealing with man, as opposed to what one of the great theologian I mentioned his name, Thomas Aquinas, said, that God is angry and God uses to be angry, contrary to what that theologian posited, that God in his nature cannot be angry. What actually made God to be angry is when he introduced a law and that law is violated. Just as a father can be angry when you violate the law that has been set in the family unit, just like the police can be angry with you when you violate the laws of the state. If we look at God's dealing with the nation of Israel, we discover that when God formed that nation, immediately they left Egypt. The first thing God did after presenting himself to them in Mount Sinai was to give them the constitution that will guide them. You can't say that Israel has become a nation when they don't have these three characteristics which every nation possesses. Number one, every nation must have a geographical location and boundaries. At that time when they left Egypt, God has given them a land, which is land of Canaan, which they're about to enter. And as such, they are being defined as a nation. Number two, you can't say a nation is a nation if it doesn't have a leader. At that time, God has given them leader, but in the person of Moses. Number three, you can't say a nation is a nation when that nation doesn't have any guiding rules, principles, or constitution. Then God gave them constitutions that will guide them. And that is the law of Moses. Having given them these, the nation has been formed. God being angry or being happy with them is dependent on their ability to keep the law. So as we continue, we will see how God dealt with them when they failed in keeping to that law, and how God dealt with them when they were succeeding in keeping the law. What are we trying to establish? What happens in our lives oftentimes is as a result of our inability to keep to the requirements of God in our life. I want us to know, for those who are Christian, who believe in the concept of faith, who has misconstrued what grace is all about, I want us to know that God is still interested in our obeying his commandments for him not to be angry with us, even though obeying God's commandment is no longer the prerequisite for justifying a man before God. It is belief in the Lord Jesus Christ. Nevertheless, when you have believed in the Lord Jesus, you must definitely obey his commandments for things to work out for you. Having said this, I want to say categorically that God is and has been angry with human being in history. My next presentation, I will cite examples where God is angry with people. Thank you for watching. Call me Pastor Elisha, a reformer with a difference.